Thank you very much for joining us. Social media is in a frenzy today, with parents asking a hard question: should children be allowed to go for sleepovers? The debate comes after the disappearance of 17-year-old Thomas Junior Sithole, who went missing during a trip on the Vaal River near Stonehaven. As South African police services continue to search, many parents are sharing fears about the safety and supervision of children that are away from home because they want to, visit their friends, etc. So let's talk about this. Let's use Thomas's disappearance as an example at this time. Such a devastating case. But how common is it? How common is it for children to disappear, or for something terrible of this nature to happen when children are on sleepovers? Joining me on the line is Ayanda Tetyana, who is a parenting expert. Ayanda, welcome to Channel Africa. Wonderful to talk to you in the new year.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a very sad topic, but we have to kind of consider all the advantages that happen as well in the context of our children being exposed to other, hopefully safer environments, other families, all the learning that really happens in terms of just their social, the peer influence. But obviously it's important to do it within a guided and very strict, you could call it like protocols, if you could use that word, just to ensure that in terms of safety, we bear that in mind. But the reality is children also do learn a lot when they get exposure to other families, they experience just how other families live their lives.
Right. That's very important what you're mentioning, Ayanda, just the protocol that comes with it. Perhaps give us some tips, some rules of engagement, if we could call it that, between, the families of the children and the children themselves. What needs to happen on a general scale when we want to sort of start introducing this level of socialization?
So I think there are quite a few things that we have to bear in mind. I'd say that it's important that we communicate, for instance, with the other parents. So, I would have been very keen for a parent, for instance, who, let's say, for instance, is having their child come over for a sleepover or a weekend at my house, to communicate things like, my child can't swim, so that, we have a kind of like a preparation, whether it's like those little eggs, these jackets that they wear, or some extra support for them if we're going to be spending time in the pool. And back to forth between the parents, whatever you are planning for the weekend, for that night, just being able to communicate it with them, so that should there be allergies, should there be pickups or drop-offs, one thing that's really important that I see a lot in terms of just my kids going over to visit other homes, things like your screen time, the bedtime, different type of diets that we may have in our home. You want to be able to have communication about that. And also just being aware that once you're out of my home as my child, in the household that you're going to be in, there's going to be a lot of different things that don't work exactly the way our home usually does things.
That's true.
Having that open mind, conversation, encouraging our children to have this open mind, the curiosity, that explorer mindset to say, let me just have this difficult, let's say, for instance, I don't necessarily eat a certain type of food. Culturally, you may get to another family and they eat something different. It'd be fun if our children have that mindset to say, I'm going to try this out. Maybe I might just like it. And then go back home and be excited to tell mom, hey, let's try this out. I really enjoyed it. So what I think is important is that as parents, we bear in mind the context of sleepovers. There's the age appropriateness, and then there's those family and cultural considerations. But as we have more of these conversations, as we expose our children to different environments, we're actually empowering them so that when it comes to their social skills, when it comes to the understanding of real life, that they are a little bit more equipped than if we keep our children in our homes because we're like super scared because one incident happened there and there and there. We also create this anxiety for our children where they just don't trust and they think the whole world is falling apart, everyone's untrustable,
Okay. Oh, it's just such a pity we don't have a lot of time. We've got to take sports. Do you have an additional 10 minutes to grant me, Ayanda? I'd like to hang up the call and then call you back so we can continue.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're going to continue with Ayanda. This is a very important conversation, especially when it comes to just some of the risky behaviors. Sometimes you're not aware. And this is not a type of topic where you can just read an article and keep it moving, right? You've got to go through the experience, learn from other people's experiences. It's an experiential thing for both parent and child. So we're going to continue with our parenting expert, Ayanda Tetyana, after the sports.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
It's a very good afternoon from the sports desk. I am Mosibu Di Makura with the latest sports news at the Sawa. So FIFA President Gianni Infantino has condemned some Senegal players for the unacceptable scenes which overshadowed their victory in Sunday's Africa Cup of Nations final when they walked off the pitch in protest at a penalty awarded to Morocco. So African football showpiece event was marred by most of the Senegalese players walking off the pitch when at deep into injury time of normal play with the match all square at 0-0, Morocco were awarded a spot kick following a VAR check for a challenge on Brahim Diaz. Now Senegal's former Liverpool star Sadio Mane remained on the pitch and urged his teammates to come back onto the pitch for the penalty. They were already furious at having a goal disallowed at the other end for a soft-looking foul minutes earlier, just before that a penalty was awarded. Meanwhile, trouble broke out in the stands as some Senegalese fans tried to enter the field of play and became involved in fighting with security personnel. The game was then held up for about 20 minutes before Diaz could take the penalty, and his weak Benaga kick was then saved by Senegal goalkeeper Edouard Mendy. Infantino, while congratulating Morocco on what he called a fantastic tournament, both as runner-ups as well as exceptional hosts, a boost ahead of them co-hosting the men's 2030 World Cup, said teams have to abide by the match officials' decisions. Infantino will now be hoping there is no such scenes in this year's World Cup that is co-hosted by the USA, Canada and Mexico, and said images such as those that the world saw on Sunday sent a very strong message to supporters around the world. Meanwhile, the Confederation of African Football earlier this afternoon released a statement condemning what they called the unacceptable behavior of some of the players as well as the officials during last night's Africa Cup of Nations final between the host nation Morocco and the eventual winners Senegal at the Prince Mullah Abdallah Stadium last night. CAF in that statement saying they strongly condemn any inappropriate behavior which occurs during matches, especially those targeting the referee, team or match organisers. They also further concluded in the statement saying they will be reviewing all the footage and will refer the matter to competent bodies for appropriate action to be taken against those found guilty. On to summer tennis news now. Coco Gauff, the third seed at this year's Australian Open, overcame some early serving wobbles to begin her Australian Open title bid with a straight sets victory earlier today. The 21-year-old is past Russian board Kamila Rakhimova of Uzbekistan 6-2, 6-3 on a hot and a sunny Rod Laver Arena. She looks back on that win.
Yeah, I thought I did well. I thought I didn't rush the point. She plays really low, so just trying my best to get the ball up. And yeah, I think in the last game I had a couple forehands and I accelerated. And yeah, I mean, I think I would have rather held serve in that one game. But yeah, I think it's the beauty of being a good returner, you know, that you have a good high chance of breaking in almost every game.
Meanwhile, in the men's game, three-time Australian Open runner-up Daniil Medvedev of Russia was forced to work very hard in grinding past Dutchman Jasper de Jong. The Russian stumbled home 7-5, 6-2 and 7-6 on a hot Margaret Court arena to move into the second round of the first Grand Slam tournament of the year. Meanwhile, former Australian Open finalist Marin Cilic of the Czech Republic turned back the clock with a ruthless display to beat Germany's Daniel Atmar 6-4, 6-love, 6-love and 7-6, while the 2014 Australian Open champion Stan Wawrinka of Switzerland beat Serbian Laslo Djere 5-7, 6-3, 6-4 and 7-6 to move into the second round of the Grand Slam tournament. Of course, it was late last year that Stan Wawrinka announced that he will be retiring from tennis in 2026. And that concludes your sports news this hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, do send us an email. That's to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Call us as well on the newsroom line. That is +27 11714 4459. I'm back with more sports news in the next hour. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu Di Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. We are on Open View's audio bouquet. Channel 628. Conversations are happening, and Channel Africa is at the heart of them. We tell the African story with clarity, pride, and purpose, reaching audiences that matter to your brand. Partner with us and connect your business with listeners across borders in multiple languages and markets. For partnership opportunities, sponsorship, or sales, email us at partnership@channelafrica.co.za. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
1:36 on the digital clock. Let's check in with the latest in business news.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Matseko. Good afternoon. The 56th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum is currently underway in Davos, Switzerland. Under the theme, A Spirit of Dialogue, leaders from government, business, civil society, science and culture will gather to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges, from climate change and energy security to technological innovation and economic inequality. Political economist Dr. Dale McKinley talks about the importance of the gathering.
Well, it matters because it's gathering the world's leaders, and particularly the world's biggest economies. And on top of that, I think probably about majority of the top corporations in the world. So basically the people who run the world economy, people who control a lot of the trade, and who we have relationships with, both in Europe and the United States in particular, but also Asia, are going to be there. So I think that's what makes it important.
Kenya has begun selling a 65% stake in its state oil pipeline firm as it looked to raise $825 million in East Africa's biggest ever initial public offering. The sale is part of a drive by President William Ruto's government to divest from state companies to raise funds for new infrastructure and sovereign wealth funds. It is also reducing its stake in telecoms operator Safaricom. The government priced the IPO in Kenya Pipeline Company at 9 shillings per share. The offer documents have revealed that the sale will run until the 19th of February and the shares will be listed for trading on the Nairobi Bourse on the 9th of March. The International Monetary Fund again edged its 2026 global growth forecast higher as businesses and economies adapt to U.S. tariffs that have eased in recent months and a continued AI investment boom that has fueled asset wealth and expectations of productivity gains. The IMF, in its World Economic Outlook, forecast global GDP growth at 3.3% in 2026, up 0.2 percentage point from its last estimate in October. The IMF says that's even with 3.3% growth in 2025, which will also beat the October estimate by 0.1 percentage point. The Global Crisis Lender forecast 2027 growth at 3.2%, unchanged from the previous forecast. It has revised global growth rates higher since last July in response to trade deals that have reduced President Donald Trump's tariff rates that peaked in April 2025. In other news, Libya's central bank has announced a 14.7% devaluation of the dinar. The move says the exchange rate at 6.37 dinar to the US dollar, the currency's second such adjustment in less than a year, citing the nation's political and economic turmoil. The move follows a 13.3% devaluation in April 2025, which has set the exchange rate at 5.56 dinars to the US dollar. The IMF has warned trade tensions and a reversal in the artificial intelligence boom are among the main risks to the global economic growth. Its comments came in its latest World Economic Outlook, where it described the global economy as steady, with growth expected to remain resilient this year. The IMF's forecast was produced ahead of Donald Trump's threat at the weekend to impose tariffs on 8 European countries opposed to his proposed takeover of Greenland. The fund also says the independence of central banks is paramount for global economic stability and growth. Now let's have a look at financial indicators. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,418 naira, Botswana 13.22. Kenya, the dollar is 128 shilling 43. Zambia 19 kwacha 89. BRICS countries, the dollar is in Brazil is trading at 5.37, Russia 78 rubles 56, India 90 rupee 25, China 6 yuan 97, South Africa 16 rand 42 cents. $1 is 74 pence to the British pound and 85 to the euro. Commodities, gold is at $4,667, platinum at $2,341 per ounce, the price of Brent crude oil at $63.47 a barrel. That's all for now. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Téléchargez l'application Channel Africa sur votre Play Store ou Apple Store afin de pouvoir suivre toutes nos émissions en direct de là où vous vous trouvez. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
The Upside, taking the African perspective to fresh levels.
All right, so here we are still in the first hour of the show. There was no way I could cut that conversation short. It was too important and lots of value that Ayanda is sharing with us. She is a parenting expert and a regular here on Channel Africa. Pleasure for her to join us as we really look at the rules of engagement when we look at sleepovers, okay? Because we are using the case that we're seeing on social media, the viral case of a 17-year-old Thomas Junior Sithole who went missing during a trip on the Vaal River near Stonehaven. This is as a result of a sleepover, as we understand it. So what are the rules? A lot of parents are now panicking about the safety of these sleepovers and what happens, in their absence, as it were. So Ayanda is still on the line with us as we continue the conversation. Ayanda, we left off where you were basically just giving us a couple of tips on how to engage between the two parent families, as it were, before children sleep over. So what are the critical questions? Should we be asking questions? Because sometimes you may be afraid, like, oh my goodness, I'm going to ask too many questions, or I'm going to have too many, don't eat this one's gluten-free, this one doesn't eat pizza, that one needs a bit of more dairy, and all these extra requirements.
I mean, when you are the hosting parent, you do have to take that responsibility.
Yeah.
That you will be, you're going to be taking someone else's child. You may not necessarily know everything there is to know about them. So having those conversations is so important. And I know in many instances what usually happens is that our children meet at school or in whichever social context they usually meet at. We as parents are not necessarily friends with each other. So in many instances, we may not really know each other in terms of our values, all of that. But because our children are friends, very important that we prioritize them creating a cordial relationship where we then feel safe for both parties to be able to have these conversations, to be able to even say things like, let's say, for instance, my child does not necessarily drink cold drinks at home. To be able to say, you know what, I will allow for this particular weekend for them to explore with that. You know, and just negotiating those between both parents. I think what's also really important is for you, Gengok, I always talk about this, as parents, when we are taking our children out there, okay, first of all, let me put it this way. As we're raising our children, we need to understand in every aspect how important it is that we're preparing them for the adult world. And then a lot needs to be done in our own homes as we are preparing them with different responsibility of the reality of the adult world. But what I really love about being exposed to all these things, as I mentioned, all the social skills, all of that that's learned, is that then from a parenting perspective, I can monitor my child. I can look whether are they mature enough to go and be away from me for a day or two at another family's house. You know, do they have the kind of... So I need to observe their responsibility, you know, problem solving, decision making. And if my children are not there yet, now I need to make it a little challenge for myself to start empowering them a little bit so that they can be equipped. You know, when we talk about things like when children are together, there's going to be peer pressure. Your child needs to be comfortable enough to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Whether they're scared or they're not comfortable to do such things, you as a parent need to understand your child in terms of just their social and their socializing. Are they comfortable enough when they're in a situation where they're not comfortable to say no and not necessarily care about being peer pressured into doing certain things? Because think about it, when teenagers are together, what do? Very risky behavior. They, you know,
That's true.
they want to do the craziest things, and in many instances they get hurt. And I also want to talk about now, as the hosting company, the hosting family, the responsibility of supervision. It is so important that when you have other children that you're watching, even your own, obviously, depending on where you are always supervising those children. If I know that I also have to prepare food, I have to do all these things, and I may not be able to supervise these children, that's where your grandparents, your aunts, your own friends then come into play. Then you can bring those people who can then be that additional village who will help monitor the situation and ensure that the children are safe.
Absolutely. It sounds to me, just based on what you're saying, Ayanda, that communication is obviously very important between the two families and the children as well. Get them involved, you know, but also to comprehend whatever's been communicated and make sure that you deliver the message where it's not hurtful to any of the parties involved. But easing pressure on the host parent, because I would imagine if I'm the parent that's hosting like 5 kids in my home and I've got to cook butter chicken for 5 children. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of pressure on the host parent to take care of the visiting child, take care of their needs, incorporate them into our family dynamic, that sort of thing. How can the host parent ease pressure, whether it's between both parties or how does it work? How can I ease the pressure of hosting someone else's child in my home?
So what I usually do with my situation is that I would obviously look at the older ones to kind of monitor, and I understand that at some point they're going to want to play because they're also children. But in terms of little things, and I think about times when we've gone to the swimming pool, you know, putting the little children on the back and just swimming across up and down with them. But for me, one of the things that I'm very intentional about is putting together those additional safety issues. So if it means maybe getting some, trying to think of the word now in English, what's a whistle? Yes, getting little whistles for the younger children. Getting those floaters that you can have also for the younger children, and just being clear to say, if you're not comfortable and maybe I'm looking away because I'm making lunch or I'm doing something, you know, feel free to blow this whistle, feel free to call the bigger brother or the bigger kids and just communicating to the bigger kids to say, hey, I may need your help. So as much as you may be playing, can you just keep an eye on these children? I will need to do a certain few things in terms of just organizing food, whatever needs to be organized, bribe, salads, but have that communication between yourself and whoever's available. And if you get busy, don't be afraid to ask the next family. They may not necessarily have come to the park, the pool with you, but in that minute where you take your eyes away from the children, ask the next family, say, hey, can you help me out? I'm just running to do an errand. Can you just watch these kids, especially the little ones, and obviously the older ones as well, because they do get naughty. You want those monitoring situations put in place. And you know what? To be honest, we can't plan for everything, right? That's just the reality.
That's true. Yeah.
So you have to just be present. If it means for that day that you're out in the park with the children, maybe don't drink, maybe don't do any of those kind of activities that may take your attention away from the kids, then you might want to do that as well. But the reality is that we can never really over-prepare. We want our children to have some experiences, maybe even gain some problem-solving experiences as a result of that. But one thing I'd say is maybe also have the conversation before you go out with everyone sitting there and say, hey guys, so we're going to this. These are the expectations. These are the safety protocols. If you find yourself being uncomfortable, this is who you talk to if you want to go to the bathroom. You can get one of the older children to be the ones who are accompanying, and just give everyone like a responsibility, and then know how to say, how do we get around some of the situations that may come up.
Okay. This is really fascinating. Also, I can tell that you are pro sleepover. You're that parent that really just is a free spirit, and you want to raise children that are free to express, but do so responsibly. When can I exercise my no as a parent? Whether I'm the host parent or whether I'm the parent on the other end. When is it time to say no sleepover? Because we get those situations that are not ideal.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I've had to have those situations when, let's say, for instance, I'm not necessarily comfortable with the family that my child is then going to. If I know that there's certain situations that are happening within the family's socioeconomic situations as well, where I feel, okay, that might expose my child to something I'm not necessarily ready for, I'm never afraid to put down my feet and say no.
Right.
But I'm always going to be honest with you that in those situations, I always bear in mind my children and their maturity. So I may expose them a little bit more, because you see, when I always speak about the importance of exposing our children to a little bit of what happens in the world. And sometimes in our own little families, there's not a lot of exposure to the realities of what happens in the world. Our children are not learning resilience.
Right.
They're just not learning while they're in these little caves that we protect them overly in our estates, all of that. But once and we were having a conversation, a week or two ago, that a lot of the children are now going to university and experiencing being outside the structure of a family. And a lot of children are struggling with anxiety. They are scared out of their minds. They will struggle to sleep for a couple of days before they get used to this new cycle. So for me, just being open to some of these things is just an exposure to the reality of what's going to happen with the rest of their lives. They're not going to be under my roof forever. I don't want them to be. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, nobody does.
Yeah. But the reality is you want to have it in a guided way. So if I know my friend right now is going through a hard time and they're fighting with their husband and all of these kind of situations,
right.
I'm not necessarily going to put my child in that situation, right? And you can think of many different contexts that could be happening. And I always tell parents to trust your instinct, even though I'm cautious to say sometimes we're a little bit extra and paranoid. So as a parent, you need to really balance that out and figure out, just think about the bigger picture. How do you give your child an advantage in giving them as much experience as they can while they're still under your roof? The kind of experience that's going to be an advantage to them when they go out into the world. And I can tell you now, just being surrounded by you alone will not do that. Going out, experiencing other families, seeing some of the challenges that are happening in the world, having a conversation about that, an open policy conversation will give them a different kind of edge.
Okay. Ayanda, thank you so much. Really, for any parent that's kind of been closed off to the idea, especially after seeing such devastating cases, you may want to exercise a no, even though you don't have to. So this was really enlightening in terms of, what is possible and why sleepovers can be an important part of socialization, I beg your pardon, for a growing child. But thank you once again, Ayanda Tetyana.co.za, should you wish to consult and perhaps get her expert services and consult with her on a one-on-one basis. Just visit the website and get all the information there. Thank you, Ayanda. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.